hasty. So we're in Matthew chapter 12. And remember always, as we're reading and studying through Matthew, that we always keep in mind who the audience was for Matthew, and it is by and large a Jewish audience. And his goal was always to point to Christ as the Messiah, that their own oracles, the Old Testament, we call it, the Pentateuch and all that, have been prophesying about. And last week we talked about how John sent his disciples to Jesus, saying, "Are you the Messiah? Are you the one?" And he said, "Well, look at what I do." So Jesus didn't just say, "Yes, I am." He said, "Look at my miracles. Look at everything that's going on." He's, essentially saying, I'm fulfilling all these prophecies. And so that was his answer to the people. I think that was Matthew's message to the Jewish people as well. And of course, Matthew had to deal a lot with Pharisees, because Pharisees were they were the holy people. They were the holy guys. They were the conservatives, right? At this time you had the Sadducees and you had the Pharisees. The Sadducees, you'd call them the liberals, if you want to put it in modern terms. Call those guys the liberals. They were the ones that didn't believe in resurrection, didn't believe in demons, didn't believe in the spiritual world. I'm sure what they believed in. But anyway, you had the Sadducees. Then the Pharisees were actually the conservative ones, and in a lot of ways we would have seen eye to eye with them on some things, because they did have some. You got to remember, as we read through this, not every Pharisee was necessarily anti-Jesus. Okay, many come to Christ. It may take them a while. It may be after the fact. You remember who was the apostle that was a Pharisee? He said he was a Pharisee of the Pharisees. Was Paul? Paul was a huge Pharisee. So when we say the word Pharisee, let's not look at it and go, "Oh, well, those guys are hopeless. They're Pharisees." We kind of use it that way these days. Like these are the bad guys, and many of them were. And he focuses on them today, but it doesn't mean that all of them were against Christ. It's just like every Jewish person wasn't anti-Jesus, right? Because he went around, and a lot of the people that were following around, they were Jewish people, and they were believing on him. So as we read through the Gospels, remember there were people that were believing on Christ. Everybody wasn't rejecting him, but still, Matthew did have a message to the Jews, because by and large they did reject him. Many didn't come to faith until after the death and the resurrection. And all. So we are dealing with a group of men who generally felt like that, they were law keepers. I keep the law, that makes me right with God. But remember, Jesus always pointed out that they had that surface knowledge of the law and that surface adherence to the law, and that the law went way deeper, as he talked about at the beginning of Matthew. It goes way down into the heart. Pharisees had a problem understanding that. They had a problem seeing that. But there was one other problem that's going to come out today that the Pharisees had, that really went beyond the law, and it was that they kept what they called the tradition of the elders. Okay, so this was these man-made traditions that had spun out of the law, but they weren't actually commandments from God himself. Okay, but they applied them to the law, and it was kind of like their commentary on the law. So, for example, today we're talking about the Sabbath. If you went to a Pharisee and you said, "What does it mean to keep the Sabbath?" Well, they had all these rules that you could only walk so far. You could only walk 3,000 feet on the Sabbath day, and they had all these ideas and rules and all what they considered work and what wasn't work and all this stuff. All of that was from men. It wasn't from God. Okay, God had just said, set aside the Sabbath. It's a day of rest. The purpose of the Sabbath was to bring people closer to God, and it was to give them a day of rest. It was to give their animals rest. It was to give their servants rest. And so they were supposed to take that day, and they were supposed to worship God. They were supposed to replenish themselves. That's what it was for. And what the Pharisees had done over time was they had turned it more into a burden, rather than a blessing. They had made it where, well, don't do this, don't do that. And we have a tendency to do that. And there has been people that have done that with Sunday worship. I remember reading in, I think it was in the Laura Ingalls Wilder books, and they were talking about how on Sundays they couldn't play They had to sit. Maybe it wasn't those books, but it was somewhere. It was, they weren't allowed to play on Sunday. They had to dress up, but they couldn't, that's not what the Sabbath was about. The Sabbath was about rest and replenishment. And we'll get into a little bit more of that and my take on that in a minute. But anyway, so that's what's at issue here. That's what's going to come out. So let's read 12, 1-2. I'll do that. And we'll talk a little bit about it. This is more of an introduction. At that time, Jesus passed through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick and eat some heads of grain. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "See, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." Now, the issue was not that they were picking grain from somebody else's field. It wasn't a legal issue here, okay? And they don't even, that's not what their issue is. What do they say? They're doing what's not lawful to do on the Sabbath. They don't have the Pharisees them picking grain from somebody's field and eating it. That's not what the Pharisees had an issue with, because they understood that actually was allowed. Now, you couldn't go and pick up a sickle and go out into somebody else's field and start harvesting it. It wasn't yours. But you were allowed, if you were hungry as you're walking by, to pick something and to eat it. And this goes back to the law, because remember, when they harvested their fields, they were supposed to leave the gleanings, right? And they were supposed to leave the corners for the poor people to come in, and then they would pick up the rest of it. And that's what this comes from. So the issue here was not that they were eating somebody's grain from somebody's field, okay? The issue for the Pharisees was that it was happening on the Sabbath, and when they saw them picking the grain, they called it harvesting. That's how nitpicky they had become. So here's these men, they're hungry, and there's grain, and it's legal in a civil sense. It's legal, and in God's law and what He has provided for, it's legal for them to reach over and eat the grain. The problem that the Pharisees have is that they are doing it on the Sabbath. It could also be, in addition to that, it says at that time Jesus passed through grain fields on the Sabbath. What's He doing when He's passing through? He's eating and He's walking. That could have been another issue. You're not supposed to walk more than 3,000 feet, they said, on the Sabbath. What was Jesus and His disciples always doing? They were walking, they were moving around, they were going from place to place to place to place. And so what they're doing is they're imposing their idea of what you should do on the Sabbath, something that doesn't come from God, and they're putting it on Jesus' disciples, and they're putting it on Christ Himself. And they're saying you shouldn't be doing this, okay? Because this is what the law says, when the law didn't really say that. What really said it was their traditions, okay? Now, we have traditions that we as Christians cannot impose upon other Christians because they're not necessarily coming from the Scriptures, okay? And we have to be careful of that as well. We got so many denominations in this country, and if you went and I know maybe Robert and Donna, maybe you've been in different churches before, and you've seen the different styles. And there's liturgical churches like the Presbyterians and I guess the Methodists. They got some things that are different. Episcopal, they're all liturgical and stuff. If we went in there as Baptists, I've been in them before, so I know what to expect. But if you went in there and you've never been in there, you're like, what in the world's going on? This is kind of strange. And I grew up in Church of God. Let me just tell you, you'd find that was strange too. And they had different practices. Okay, now. As long as a congregation, as long as a group of Christians are worshiping within the parameters of Scripture, okay? Now remember, we're not talking about morality here. We're talking about how do we conduct ourselves, say on the Sabbath. We're not talking about literal right and wrong, and that never comes up in this. That's not an issue here. It's not about morality, okay? It's about what are our practices, how do we handle the Sabbath, what traditions are things that all Christians need to be doing, and what are some that they can do, but they don't necessarily have to do. And we can't impose that upon them, right? Y'all have all heard the stories, maybe you haven't. There was that one story where there was this church, this Baptist church, where right before the Lord's Supper, the pastor would go over and he would touch the radiator. and then he would serve the Lord's Supper to the congregants. As time passed, this pastor retired, and they hired a new guy, a young guy. So the young guy comes in, and he does communion one Sunday, and somebody gets irate, and they talk about how he's unscriptural and all, and he can't figure out what it is, and they said that he has to touch the radiator. And if he's, you got to touch the radiator before you serve the. So the pastor calls up the elder pastor, the one that had retired, and said, "What is this about?" Because he's flabbergasted. He's like, "This is a true story. I'm not sure what's going on here. What was the ritual of you touching the radiator? What was the spiritual component of that?" And the older pastor starts kind of chuckling. He says, "I would touch the radiator to get out my static electricity, so that when I picked up the communion plates, it wouldn't happen then." And that was all he was doing. He was just reaching over, getting the static electricity out so that when he grabbed the metal on the plates, he wouldn't zap himself. Because I guess he felt like he'd rather get zapped over there than while he was touching the communion plates and make a spectacle. And that's how he would do it. But somebody looked at that, and that was a tradition that had been going on, and they felt like it always had to happen. And if it didn't happen, something was going wrong. We have that mentality. We fall into these traditions. Things got to happen a certain way. Traditions aren't necessarily bad, okay? Like I preach with a lot of guys, and many of them get up at 3:30 in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning to pray. It's almost like that's what they do. I mean, whenever I'm on these trips, guys are rattling around in the kitchen at 3 a.m. And that's why I always come back so tired, because I end up having to get up. Because they're praying at 3 a.m. And if you're not careful, you look at that and you'll go, well, maybe I should be getting up at 3 a.m. to pray. That seems to be like the holy hour or something like that, And if I'm not doing that, and finally I came to the realization, it's like, that's just what they do. I'm going to pray. I'll pray when I get up, but I'm not getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning. And not only that, my lifestyle doesn't allow for that. I have to stay up kind of late. These guys go to bed at 7 o'clock at night if they want to. Get up at 3 a.m., fine. But my point is that there are habits and traditions, not necessarily bad. Getting up at 3 a.m. and praying is not bad. It's not something you shouldn't do. But it's not something that you necessarily can lay on somebody else, is what I'm saying. So we need to be careful. We need to be cognizant of that. On the other hand, there's legalism. That's the Pharisees' problem. We also have to be careful of what they call licentiousness, where we believe we're outside and out from under the law altogether, and that none of it applies to us at all, particularly as moral law. And we got to be careful about that, okay? But what was going on right here was these guys, they didn't care about the fact that they were hungry or anything like that. They didn't care about the fact that Jesus was going around doing good and all that. It was that they were picking grain with their hands, not harvesting it. They were picking it and walking on the Sabbath, okay? So they were missing the forest for the trees, so to speak, okay? So that's what's going on. So let's turn over. And then this is Jesus' response to them. He said to them, "Haven't you read what David did when he and those who were with him were hungry?" This is that time when David was fleeing from Saul, and Saul was going to kill him. And David basically had to flee. He had nothing he couldn't take anything with him. It was like, go. And he came into the temple, and he met I think it was Ahimelech, the priest in there. And he's like, "You got anything to eat?" Because he wasn't able to take provisions with him. And Ahimelech says, "I got the showbread." Okay, that's what he's talking about. And David and his men ate it because that's all they had. So how he entered the house of God, that's what it's talking about. And they ate the bread of the presence. We call it the showbread in some translations, which is not lawful for him or for those with him to eat, but only for the priests. And then, or haven't you read in the law that on Sabbath days, the priests in the temple violate the Sabbath and are innocent? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. So you got David who's hungry, and he goes into the temple, and he goes to the priest, and he says, "We need food." And Ahimelech says, "All I have is the bread of the presence. All I have is the showbread." The showbread was there as a symbol of the presence of God with the people, and it was a violation of God's ritual law to eat it. Only the priests were allowed to eat it, but David ate it. And by implication, Jesus is saying he wasn't guilty. He was violating that ritual, but he wasn't guilty, okay? And not only that, priests work on Sabbath days, right? When they're in the temple, because all those sacrifices they had to be done every day. The Sabbath day was not exempted from it. They did them all. They had to do all, so they had to work. And yet, God's not looking down on them going, oh, you're working on the Sabbath, because they're actually fulfilling something He's told them to do, okay? So the implication here, there are times when God looks down and His ritual law does not take precedence over His mercy on people. He gave mercy to David. David could eat the showbread. He was hungry. The priests who are also told to work on the Sabbath, they can work on the Sabbath and they're innocent. Now, notice, neither one of those things are moral issues. Do you see that? David, he's not talking about when David sinned with Bathsheba, right? He's not talking about when David killed Uriah. He's not saying God winks at sin. He's saying, look, there's times when even God will, His ritual law, He will suspend for the sake of mercy. Okay? That's what He's saying. God did this in the Old Testament. I forget which king it was, but it had been a long time since the people had a Passover meal. And the king prays to God and is like, you know what? They're not going to have time to do their ritual cleansing that they're supposed to do. People don't even know what's going on. We've had so many bad kings that they're so out of practice, they're clueless, and they're not going to be able to cleanse themselves to have this. We want to have it anyway. And you know what God says? Go for it. Do it. Right? There are times when God, even under the Old Testament law, is looking at His ritual law and He's going to say, mercy. Allow them to perform the Passover meal, even though they haven't done all the ritual cleansing. Allow David to eat the showbread, even though really under the ritual law, the priests are the only ones that are supposed to eat it. Okay? Allow the priests to work, because I'm not gonna hold them accountable for working and then punish them for doing it at the same time. I'm merciful in that way. The implication here is if God can suspend His ritual requirements, ceremonial requirements for mercy, how much more should you as a human being be able to suspend your human laws for the sake of mercy as well? And see, that was the problem that the Pharisees had. Their problem was not keeping the law or not keeping the law. The fact is, Jesus probably, if the Pharisees believed, if they really had it on their consciences, you know what? I'm not going to travel 3,000 feet on the Sabbath. I know a pastor who will not there's a whole lot of disagreement and discussion over, Sundays versus Saturdays and blah, blah, blah. And then, should the Sunday be considered a Christian Sabbath, or, there's a lot of discussion on that. But I know a pastor who hallows the Sunday, the first day of the week, and he's like, and there's a lot that do this. I have a lot of friends that do this. And, they won't do anything. They won't shop. They won't do any of that stuff on the Sabbath. They don't impose it on everybody else, but they won't do it. And I noticed one preacher that would only drive his car to church. Those were his rules for the Sabbath. He didn't try to impose them on anybody else. They were his. And it was okay for him to do that because that's how he stayed in the right frame of mind to worship the Lord. So I don't think Jesus would have told the Pharisees, hey, stop that with all that stuff. He wasn't saying abandon how you handle the Sabbath. What he was saying was that you can't impose it on somebody else, and you shouldn't let it preempt your mercy on people. Because the heart of God is mercy, is what he's saying. All right? And he says it down in verse 7. If you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent. Okay? God is far more concerned about mercy toward people who need it than He is necessarily toward even ritual law. Okay? But something else is going on here. And again, keeping in mind that Matthew is writing this gospel largely to Jewish audience. He says some pretty powerful things. He says some pretty heavy things when he makes these statements that are even beyond the personal. Okay? There's the personal level here where it's like, have mercy on people. Don't impose your legalism on somebody. and just, without having any mercy on them whatsoever. Have the heart of God here. There's that. So there's that personal note, but there's a bigger commentary that Jesus is making here as well. And I think Matthew's trying to make it to the people. He says two huge statements when he says this. He says, one, I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. Now, he's talking to Jewish people. What was their center of worship? It's the temple. Everything was about the temple. That's where it all happened. That was like it. That was the place. They had their synagogues because they were spread out and all, but they would come to the temple at least once a year. They would come there, and that was their place. That was it. The temple was everything to them. And what is Jesus saying here? There's something greater than the temple. He's talking about himself, is amongst you. There's a message there. He's like, there's someone here that is bigger than your temple worship. And that ought to have been a clue for them about who this was, about him being Messiah, about looking to him rather than looking back to the old traditions and even the temple worship. What's going to happen to the temple? In 70 years, it's getting destroyed. Remember Jesus' followers, Jesus' disciples, I believe is in Matthew, they come in and they're like, hey, look at this temple. Look at how beautiful it is. Remember what he said? He's like, there's going to come a time when not one stone is on another one. It's getting destroyed. And it does get destroyed. We know that from history. He gets wiped out. Temple's gone. But Christ remains. And he's saying this. He's saying something greater than the temple. It's just like him saying someone greater than Moses is here. Someone, before Abraham was, I what? I am. Because they revered these people. They revered Abraham. They revered Moses. They revered the temple. And Jesus is constantly saying, I'm greater than Abraham. I'm greater than Moses. I'm greater than the temple. Okay? I supersede all of this stuff. And then the other big bombshell that he drops is verse 8. For the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. Who gave the Sabbath mandate? God did. Okay? It happens pretty quick, actually, pretty quick after Exodus, and really there's some hints of it even before then. God gives the mandate for the Sabbath, and Jesus is saying he is Lord of the Sabbath. By implication, he's saying what? I'm God. I'm the one that says what the Sabbath is. I'm the one that says what you can and can't do on the Sabbath. I'm the one that holds people accountable for that. I'm Lord of the Sabbath. And that expression, Son of Man, comes from Daniel 7, which we should, I'm just saying, this is something y'all should be aware of. That wasn't when you said Son of Man, it could mean son of people, son of a dude, son of just a regular guy. But when he used it in this way, and when they used it, it was referencing Daniel 7, when there's a scene in there where God is on his throne. And while God is on his throne, a man, the Son of Man, one like the Son of Man, comes riding on the clouds. And they know that not only is God on his throne, but there's another one that's equal with God because he's riding the clouds. That's what deities did. They rode the clouds. And so when they use this expression, the Son of Man, that's what it was a reference to. So when Jesus says this, he's saying basically that prophecy in Daniel 7, the Son of Man coming on the clouds, that's me. And I am Lord of the Sabbath. I am the one that makes the Sabbath rules. I am the one that makes the Sabbath laws. So not only are we to be careful of our own proclivities toward legalism and imposing them on other people, and not only are we to have the heart of God, right, in merciful worship, but we're also supposed to look at this and we're also supposed to see is like, oh, he's God. He's Messiah. He's the one coming on the clouds. He's the one that the prophecies have been talking about. Last week he was talking about Isaiah, prophecies from Isaiah. when he said, look at all the miracles and all. Let them speak for themselves, that I'm fulfilling the prophecies. And now he's hearkening back to Daniel. He's like, I'm this one. I'm the one riding the clouds. I'm the one that's talking about. That's what he's saying here. So the Pharisees, again, their ears should have been clued to that. They should prick up. They should, like a dog. You know, when a dog hears something and their ears go, whoop. That's what should have happened here. The Pharisees should have said, this is something I need to listen to. But what happens? So that goes to our next section here. So it says, moving on from there, he entered their synagogue. Now, it's the Sabbath day, so what is the Lord Jesus doing on the Sabbath day? He's worshiping, right? That's what he does. Again, let me say something about this. I got to say something about Sabbath day and Sunday. We meet on Sunday. It wasn't something that, you know, the Seventh-day people want to say, oh, it was a mandate from a it was either an emperor or a pope or something. He just said, we're going to meet on Sunday. Where do we first learn about them meeting on the first day of the week? The Christians? In the Bible. That's where we hear it. They were meeting on the first day of the week. Why were they meeting on the first day of the week? Jesus rose from the first day of the week. There's a significant change. When Christ came, when he died on the cross and he rose up again, there was a change. Okay? So it's okay to meet on Sundays. All right? Now, do I think that you got to get nitpicky about everything you do on Sunday? No. I do, however, believe that our hearts ought to want to be with the congregation on Sunday. We should want to be. In other words, we shouldn't have the mindset, I'll go when I feel like it. You know, I'll go once or twice a month or once or twice a year or, you know, every other week or whatever. And I have to, you know, it's something I got to do. I got to go to church. I got to fulfill this checkbox. And I got to do that. And so I'll do it every now and then. That shouldn't be our heart. It also shouldn't be, I remember at one particular church, people would come into the early service towing their boats because the idea was, let's get church out of the way and then what? Go to the lake. You know? Is it wrong to go to the lake on Sunday? Not necessarily. But where's your mind? Where's your heart? I mean, when you're going in to worship God, are you going in to worship God or are you going in to check a box so that you can do whatever you want to do after that? And so I do think we need to be careful about how we view this day of the week, because this is the day that our congregation comes together, worships God. I believe we could do it on Monday if we wanted to. I believe we could do it on Tuesday if we wanted to. But we've designated this day, this time, and I think if at all possible, we need to be here for that. And I know that, you know, we're not all here all the time. We got vacations, we got family stuff, I got stuff, I'm traveling. People travel, sometimes people have to work. Kevin has to work. Mom, when we were coming up, you know, she had to work on Sundays sometimes. That's okay. But in general, when you can be here, I do think the heart is, you should want to be here. You should want to be with the brethren, okay? You should want to hear the word of God preached. That's how I feel about Sabbath anyway, about Sunday worship. So Jesus was in the synagogue. He's going to synagogue to worship. And there he saw a man who had a shriveled hand, and in order to accuse him, they asked him, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" He replied to them, "Who among you, if he had a sheep that fell into a pit on the Sabbath, wouldn't take hold of it and lift it out? A person is worth more or far more than a sheep. So it is lawful to do what is good on the Sabbath." Then he told the man, "Stretch out your hand." So he stretched it out, and it was restored as good as the other. But the Pharisees went out and plotted against him how they might kill him. So Jesus has told them about how, look guys, if you really are worshipers of God, you know, if you really value the Sabbath so much, if you really value the law of God so much, why don't you have the same heart of mercy inside of you as God does? That's the first question he's really asked him with all that other stuff. Why aren't you merciful like him if you really love his law so much? He had said that to him. And then he had pointed to himself as Messiah. He had said all these things to him. And what are they doing here? What does it say? It says there, when they went into the synagogue, he saw a man with a shriveled hand, And in order to accuse him, they asked him. They're trying to set him up. They're trying to trap him. And it says something about what they know about Jesus. They see the man with the shriveled hand. They've been observing Jesus and what he's been doing. What do they know he's going to do? They know he's going to heal the man. They know he's going to do it. Not only do they know he's going to heal the man, they know that he can do what? He can do it. Think about that. What should they be expecting of Messiah? That he wants to heal and that he can heal. What has Jesus been doing? He's been healing and he's actually been doing it. He doesn't just desire it, he actually does it. He goes, get up and walk. Guy gets up and walks. He says, here's some fish. 20,000 people. There it is. 12 basketfuls left over. Here's 4,000. 11 basketfuls left over. 13. Whatever it was. I can't remember that one. He's just been healing. He's been healing. He's been healing the sick. He's been casting out demons. He's been showing not only his desire to do it, but he's been showing his ability to do it. And instead of them looking at that and going, this is Messiah, we need to listen to what he has to say, they use that very truth that he wants to heal and that he can heal to get him in trouble on the Sabbath in their minds. Do you want to talk about missing the forest for the trees? Do you want to talk about legalism? It's when you're looking at Messiah and you're going, okay, yeah, I get it. He's fulfilling all these prophecies. Everything in the Old Testament that says what Messiah is going to be, it is in this man, but he's doing it on the Sabbath. Think about that. And he has just told them who he is. And they're like, oh, we know he's going to heal this dude. Let's trap him. And that's what they do. And of course, he knows they know, and he's going to do it anyway because he's Lord of the Sabbath. And he does it. And then after he does it and he restores the man, what do? We got to figure out a way to kill him. All right. My point here is this. These men just don't like Jesus. Okay? They don't care if he's fulfilling the prophecies. They don't want him. This is the heart of man. This is the heart of man. That when Christ comes, when God shows who he is, undoubtedly, indubitably, because man loves himself so much, because man loves his tradition so much, he's going to forget it. Let's kill this dude. Talk about, like I said, missing the forest for the trees. So y'all, have mercy like God has mercy. If you love his law, you'll love his mercy. Know who Jesus Christ is, that he has fulfilled all these things. He did all these things. He did all the miracles. He couldn't have been more plain on who he was. He couldn't have been more, we call it what, transparency these days? Let's be transparent. He could not have been more transparent. I'm the Messiah. I'm the one. Look at what I'm doing. And I'm going to show you, as you try to trap me and murder me, I'm going to show you. And he heals the dude. It's a pretty bold statement, and it's a pretty big statement here. And they totally miss it. It goes over their heads. The evidence is there, and they reject it. That's basically what's going on. Evidence is there, y'all. Have you ever thought about the impact that Christ's coming has had on the world? Now think about it. This was a tiny place. This was one dude. And how long did his ministry last? Earthly ministry. 3 years, as far as we know. 3-year ministry. You know how long John MacArthur's ministry lasted? Was it 70 years or something crazy? Or 60 or something like that? He's not going to have the impact that Christ did. In 100 years, I mean, there'll be people that know of John MacArthur, and I'm not knocking. I love the man. He was a great preacher and all that. I'm just saying, in 100 years, there's going to be preachers and there's going to be theologians and all. They're going to still be reading John MacArthur. And there may be a few Christians, oh, this is great. But there ain't none of them going to have a worldwide holiday every year for John MacArthur. My point is this. If you need evidence of who Christ is, just look at how his message has proliferated the world. It has gone everywhere. And from a human perspective, from his short ministry and at the end of which he dies, that shouldn't happen. But it has. It has impacted the world. The gates of hell have not prevailed against it. You know the fastest growing church in the world, right? As far as I understand it. You know where it is? China. China. Where atheists, that's the rule pretty much. You know, we're atheists pretty much. You can have a church, but you got to do it by our rules. But by and large, communist regimes are atheistic regimes, and they want you to have faith in the state. They want you to worship the state. And one of the I don't know if it's the fastest, but it's one of the places where it's fastly growing is in China. What's the human explanation for that? I'll give it to you. There is none. So if you want to know what the evidence for Christ is, because you weren't here at the first off, we've got the Word of God, which is a testament to that. We've got eyewitness accounts of all that he did, but then look at how he's impacted the world and how he's still doing it. And they can't do away with the Word, and they can't discredit the Word, and they've been trying for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Right after World War I, you know what everybody was saying? Christianity's dead. It's going away. It'll be gone. That's what the brainies were saying. That's what the eggheads were saying. Guess what? It ain't gone anywhere. And why is that? Because Christ is who he said he is. He is who he showed who he was too. So let's pray. I gotta go. Father, thank you for your word. Thank you for showing us who Christ is, not only through your word, which is important, and we can never gainsay that, and we have to look to that. And launching from that, we also see how it's impacted the entire world and continues to do so. So, Lord, I pray nobody in here would turn their heart away from Christ like the Pharisees did when they actually heard him, saw him, and witnessed his miracles. Let us not do the same thing they did. In Christ's name, amen.